Despite tireless detective work and decades of advances in forensic technology, some murders in Chicago remain unsolved, cases that fade from the headlines long before the questions surrounding them ever do. Today we're discussing Ghosts of the City, Chicago's Unsolved Murders. I'm Tommy Henry, and this is the Chicago History Podcast. Disclaimer, this episode deals with all the bad stuff. Murders, assault, grieving families, and more. Listener discretion is strongly advised. The late 1950s in Chicago were especially heinous when it came to the murders of the innocents. Co-writer and co-host Anna Mason and I discussed the October 1955 murders of Robert Peterson, 14, John Schuessler, 13, and John's brother Anton Jr., 11, in episode 625 of this podcast about Silas Jane, the killer horseman. Episode 723 covered the murder of the teenaged Grimes sisters, who went missing after an outing to the movies in December of 1956. Their bodies were found in January of 1957 near a river in the suburbs. Sadly, there were other Chicago murders in the late 50s that were even more horrifying. Margaret Gallagher, the Spyglass murder. Mary Margaret Gallagher was an Irish immigrant who had lived most of her life in Chicago's uptown neighborhood. Born in Ireland, she and her family emigrated to the United States in 1928 during a wave of Irish employment immigration. Family members later told reporters she had, quote, the temperament of a worker and a dreamer, practical yet spiritual with strong ties to her parish community. Gallagher lived modestly at 915 Carmen Avenue, only a few blocks from St. Thomas of Canterbury on Kenmore, just north of Lawrence Avenue, where she attended daily mass. Her friends later described her as devout, dependable, and quietly sociable. In 1937, she opened a small beauty parlor with a partner, Ima Rooney, at 5004 North Kenmore Avenue, calling it the Gallagher and Rooney Beauty Studio. By the summer of 1956, Margaret Gallagher was 50 years old, still operating her salon, and known for preferring weekends to herself. Her independence and daily routine made her sudden death that July even more inexplicable. Sunday, July 23, 1956, began as an ordinary summer day along Chicago's North Lakefront. As Margaret Gallagher had the day off, she walked from her apartment toward a park near Foster Avenue in Lake Michigan, a short route she often took for relaxation or reading. She reportedly packed a small towel, carried her purse, and brought with her a worn copy of Ben-Hur, a novel she had been rereading that month. Witnesses later told investigators that Gallagher settled on the grassy area west of the pedestrian path on a beach chair to sunbathe. Sometime after midday, passers-by heard a short cry, and then silence. Arthur K. Besley, who lived at 4980 Marine Drive, had been looking out the window of his 15th floor apartment through field glasses. Besley, the head of the Norwegian American Hospital, now called Humboldt Park Health in Chicago's Humboldt Park neighborhood, enjoyed watching the boats on Lake Michigan with his wife Adrienne. Scanning the lakeshore grounds, Besley saw a man throw a towel around the neck of Margaret Gallagher, hit her on the head, and drag her into some bushes. Besley and his wife rushed downstairs and flagged down a passing motorcycle policeman. By the time the officer reached the scene, the attacker had escaped. In the dense thicket just off the path, police discovered Margaret Gallagher's brutally beaten and lifeless body, partly concealed with brush. A half-torn book page and part of a towel lay a few feet away. Investigators inferred she had been dragged roughly 15 feet into the bushes after being ambushed while reading or napping. Her purse was found nearby, its contents undisturbed, ruling out robbery as a motive. Gallagher's homicide would soon be described by newspapers as the Spyglass murder. Detectives from the Chicago Police Bureau of Homicide photographed the scene and interviewed roughly 100 people who had been in the park that afternoon. Among those questioned were joggers, picnickers, and nearby lifeguards. None had seen the attack itself. A driver later reported seeing a shirtless man emerging from the trees around the time of the killing. He described the suspect as about 6 feet tall, heavy-set, massive-armed, with a foolish look to his face. The man left the area hastily, heading north on the parkway. Although this description was broadcast widely, no arrest followed. Because Margaret Gallagher carried identification in her dress pocket, police notified her family and confirmed her identity later that evening through her brother and sister. Newspapers noted the solemnity of the identification. One of the gentlest women of Uptown, beaten on a Sunday afternoon in the sight of thousands. Margaret Gallagher's autopsy showed she had been struck repeatedly in the head with a heavy blunt object consistent with a pipe, club, or rock wielded with such extreme force that it fractured her skull. There was evidence of an attempted sexual assault, but the medical examiner specified no completed rape occurred. While aspects of the Gallagher killing resembled several other Northside attacks against women from the same period, nothing directly linked those cases. The killing produced an outpouring of fear. Chicago's Northside parks along the beach, usually crowded on summer weekends, emptied the following week. Clergy at St. Thomas of Canterbury called Margaret Gallagher's murder a crime against decency itself. The Chicago Tribune and Chicago Daily News devoted front-page coverage to Gallagher's slaying for nearly 2 weeks. Headlines emphasized the shocking vulnerability of ordinary women at public parks. Editorials demanded increased patrols along the lakefront, and the city council briefly debated the installation of emergency call boxes. For women across the North Side, Gallagher's death became a byword for caution, one columnist wrote decades later. The story of the Spyglass murder soon went cold. More on the case of Margaret Gallagher in a bit. Judith Mae Andersen. Judith Mae Judy Andersen was born in 1941, the only daughter and the youngest of 4 children, born to Ralph and Ruth Andersen, residents of Chicago's Austin neighborhood on the city's far west side. Her family was close-knit and working class. Ralph Andersen Sr., 44, was a bookbinder and maintained a reputation for integrity and discipline. At 15, Judy was tall, at 5 feet 8 inches, and athletic, with blonde hair and blue eyes. Family members described her as cooperative, lively, and reliable. She attended Austin High School, where she was preparing to enter her junior year. Friends said she was mature for her age and enjoyed popular music, church socials, and quiet evenings with friends. Around 7 p.m. on Friday, August 16, 1957, Judith told her parents she was heading to her friend Elena's to watch television, promising to return by 11 p.m. Ralph Andersen Sr. recalled her smiling as she left, carrying her purse and a small gift for her mother's upcoming birthday. Her younger brother James, then 12, remembered drying dishes in the kitchen when Judy called him into her room to show him the vase. "Psst, want to see what I got Mom for her birthday?" It was the last conversation they ever shared. Judith reached her friend's residence without incident. The girls chatted, listened to records, and spent much of the evening with Elena's mother and brothers. At 11 p.m., Judy called her mom to ask if she could stay out later, but her mom told her no. Although her friend offered to walk with her part of the way back, Judy set off by herself for the 3/4-mile walk home. When Judith hadn't returned by midnight, her father Ralph went looking for her. Angry at first, Mr. Andersen gradually became concerned, walking every conceivable route between the Andersen house and Judith's friend Elena's home. Finding no trace of Judith, Ralph Andersen contacted the Chicago Police Department's 25th District to file a missing persons report. After learning Judith wasn't allowed to stay out late that night, police initially treated the matter as a runaway, but her family and friends refused to believe that was the case. Within hours, the missing person alert circulated citywide. Officers canvassed alleys, schoolyards, and underpasses between Austin Boulevard and North Central, but found no clues. Judith's friend Elena kept vigil with the family that Saturday afternoon. Sitting with Judith's brothers, she told them, "Judy would never run away just because she couldn't watch an old movie. Your sister would never do that." 6 days later, on Thursday, August 22, 1957, fishermen at Montrose Harbor, roughly 9 miles from the Andersen home, spotted a 55-gallon metal oil drum bobbing near the north breakwater. After pulling it ashore, the oil drum was opened and found to contain the dismembered body of a female submerged in stagnant water. The body was missing its head and one arm, and both hands were missing. Without the head or hands, immediate identification would not be possible. Members of the Andersen family refused to believe the worst. 2 days later, on August 24th, a second container, a 5-gallon paint bucket, was discovered floating about a foot from shore. Inside was a human head, a right arm, and left hand. Both containers were crudely sealed with duct tape and weighted with stones. Through dental records and a fingerprint on a painting of Jesus that hung in Judith's bedroom, the worst of the Andersen family's fears were confirmed. The remains were that of their daughter, Judith, who had been missing 8 days. Andersen was the 6th child murdered in Chicago in the last 2 years. Autopsy results showed that Judith had been shot 4 times with a .32 caliber revolver, twice in the head, once in the neck, and once through the jaw. Powder burns indicated at least one close-range shot. Pathologists determined death was instantaneous, with dismemberment occurring post-mortem. Early reports speculated that old ammunition might have weakened penetration, suggesting the killer used outdated or poorly stored bullets. News of the grisly murder of Judith Mae Andersen stunned Chicago, a city still reeling from the unsolved deaths of Barbara and Patricia Grimes and those of the Peterson-Schussler boys. Judith's murder seemed proof that the city harbored a killer or killers preying on young men and women. Police Superintendent Orlando Wilson called it, quote, the work of a cold, methodical killer who knew how to conceal evidence and vanish. Local clergy decried a sickness loose in the city. The public demanded extra patrols at parks and harbors. Judith's funeral was held August 30th, 1957, attended by hundreds of classmates, neighbors, and law enforcement officials. Chicago's Mayor Daley reportedly personally telephoned Ralph Andersen to extend condolences. Judith Mae Andersen was later cremated. Fishermen not far from where the drums were found told investigators that several nights earlier they had seen a car back down to the water's edge. One of the brake lights was out. A well-built man got out of the car and opened the trunk, throwing several items into the water. Because it was dark, the fishermen did not get a good look at the man's face. Within days, more than 150 officers under the Bureau of Homicide's Chief Charles Nash joined the search for the killer. Detectives questioned hundreds of men in the Austin and Uptown districts. Laborers, truck drivers, factory hands, anyone with access to oil drum containers. They scoured construction yards and riverfront slips where drums matching the serial number might have been stolen. One odd discovery during the search for clues into the murder of Judith Mae Andersen was that of a doctor's leather bag pulled from Montrose Harbor, not far from where Andersen's head and torso were found. The bag, which contained scissors, syringes, and other medical equipment, was later determined by the crime lab to have been submerged for some time and likely not connected to the Andersen murder. But to whom did it belong? And why was it there? Investigators also interviewed Kenneth Blevins, a Navy sailor who had briefly dated Judith. Blevins cooperated fully from his Oklahoma base, denied seeing Judith since August 11th, and passed a polygraph test. Authorities cleared him. Chicago's Mayor Richard J. Daley, under mounting public pressure, offered a $5,000 reward, which the Chicago Tribune augmented to $50,000 for information leading to arrest. Additional money was donated to the reward, and by the end of August, the amount offered was $74,500, nearly $900,000 in today's value. Investigators also focused on several gas station attendants and scrap dealers who might have supplied industrial drums. One attendant, questioned for keeping a .32 caliber revolver, admitted selling the gun to a man named Jack, a bearded construction worker known only by his first name. Police never located him. An official for the Material Service Corporation announced his company would finance the distribution of 10,000 police flyers showing the oil drums in which Judith Andersen's remains were found to the corporation's customers and clients. According to the excellent book Getting Away with Murder, written by John O'Brien and Ed Bauman, during the first year alone, 115,000 people were interviewed by police, 2,240 suspects were questioned, and 73 lie detector tests were administered. Police also followed up on 152 reports of gunshots heard the night Judy disappeared. None of those efforts proved fruitful. Investigators initially suspected a sexual motive, but medical examiners found no conclusive evidence of an assault. Another theory emerged. The killer was a psychopath with medical knowledge, given the precision of the dismemberment. Forensic experts said the cuts were delivered with a heavy knife or hatchet, quote, by someone familiar with anatomy but not necessarily trained. A blood-stained carpenter's hatchet recovered near the lakefront fueled that speculation, but ballistics and chemical tests proved inconclusive. As the investigation floundered, the press began linking Judith's murder to other unsolved Chicago killings, including Margaret Gallagher's 1956 attack near Foster Beach and earlier youth homicides such as the Schussler-Peterson murders in 1955. All victims were young, white, and attacked outdoors, often on weekends. Police were also busy investigating a series of robberies and sexual assaults on women on the north and northwest sides. The attacks followed a pattern in which women were confronted as they were walking alone, often after getting off a city bus. The attacker would display a knife, then bind his victims with rope. In each case, the type of rope matched the other assaults. While the attacks appeared clearly sexually motivated, none of the victims was raped and no semen was ever recovered. Chicago Chief of Detectives Patrick Dealey formed a special unit consisting of 200 officers to investigate the attacks, putting Sergeant Charles Fitzgerald in charge. Fitzgerald was considered a loner who regularly worked 15-hour days with one goal in mind: to put away criminals. As a member of the Chicago Police Department, he had earned 24 creditable mentions, was cited twice for bravery by the city council, and was recognized by the FBI 5 times. Charles Fitzgerald once solved a murder by piecing together a torn love letter found in a garbage can. Fitzgerald had his men trail buses from a distance, and before long, one of his team spotted a car following a bus on Western Avenue near Peterson. As one of the car's taillights was out, the detectives pulled the car over. Behind the wheel was someone who matched the description of the person attacking women in the area. 23-year-old Barry Xander Cook, a 200-pound construction worker with a boyishly handsome face. Not wanting to tip off Cook, police wrote him a ticket for the broken taillight and sent him on his way. Sergeant Fitzgerald was sure they had the right guy and put Cook under surveillance. The authorities' next move was driving victims past the construction sites where Cook worked in order to identify him. All went according to plan until the last day of February 1958, when Cook spotted the police and one of his victims. Cook took off running with 4 detectives in pursuit. Shots were fired, and after being slowed by a bullet to the leg, Cook was tackled by a detective in the 6300 block of North Winthrop Avenue. Cook's desperate attempts to avoid questioning raised the suspicions of the authorities, leading those investigators to believe Cook may have been responsible for the series of crimes against women in the area. Upon examination at Cook County Hospital, it was discovered that Barry Cook was endowed with the genitalia of a 6-year-old boy and was unable to achieve regular sexual gratification. Charles Fitzgerald attempted to interview Cook, but Cook pretended to be unconscious for weeks, refusing to open his eyes or speak to anyone except his father. This necessitated the need for police to bring victims to the hospital. To avoid claims of impropriety, police filled Cook's ward with 35 patients in their early 20s with a similar build. Victims were asked if they could recognize their assailant from among those patients lying in their beds. Once statements from the victims were taken, the grand jury indicted Cook on 7 counts of assault with intent to rob, rape, and murder. Because of the violent nature of the attacks, Barry Cook became a prime suspect in the murder of Judith Mae Andersen and the Spyglass murder of Margaret Gallagher. Barry Cook continued to refuse to talk to anyone but his father, so Sergeant Fitzgerald tried a new approach. He suggested to Cook's father that his son could be cleared of any suspicion in the homicides by taking a polygraph test, which he did. Instead of clearing Barry Cook, the lie detector test indicated he had guilty knowledge of both the Margaret Gallagher and Judith Andersen murders. Through an open door at the polygraph firm's offices, Fitzgerald reportedly overheard Barry Cook tell his father that he had killed a woman. "Don't tell me you killed the Andersen girl," his father responded. "Don't tell anyone that you killed the Andersen girl." Fitzgerald confronted Barry Cook with the results of the test and calmly suggested, "You did kill Judy, didn't you?" Cook nodded and quietly responded, "I'll tell you everything if my dad says it's okay." The elder Cook flatly told his son, "Do not talk to anybody." With that, Sergeant Fitzgerald had no choice but to send Cook back to Murderers Row at Cook County Jail. Fitzgerald's next move was to send an undercover cop into the jail to see if he could get Cook talking. For this plan, he chose Detective Anthony Muranaka, a slightly built Japanese-American who looked nothing like a Chicago cop of the time. Muranaka would be booked on phony charges and sent to Cook County Jail with the goal of befriending Barry Cook. After a few days of solitary confinement, Muranaka was transferred to Murderers Row, where Barry Cook was housed. There, Muranaka started a conversation with Cook, gradually earning his confidence. As their friendship developed over the next 2 weeks, Cook told him how he murdered Margaret Gallagher and Judith Andersen. As for the series of indictments charging him with the rape and robbery of Northside women, on June 23, 1958, Cook entered a plea of guilty to 7 charges of assault and assault to commit rape. He was sentenced to 1 to 14 years at Joliet. In need of more information about the Andersen and Gallagher murders, authorities once again sent Detective Muranaka back inside, this time as Barry Cook's cellmate. Relieved to see a familiar face, Cook once again began to share the details of the killings, telling Muranaka all he needed to hear. Charles Fitzgerald visited Cook in prison, and once he told Barry all they knew, Cook asked to speak to the warden. On October 12, 1958, Barry Cook confessed to the murder of Margaret Gallagher. 5 days later, he was indicted for the killing, largely on circumstantial evidence and Cook's own inconsistent admissions. Confessions Cook later recanted. In the spring of 1959, Barry Cook was returned to Chicago to face trial for the murder of Margaret Gallagher. This story was so significant that it made banner headlines in the 4 downtown daily newspapers day after day. Cook's defense argued there were no witnesses, fingerprints, or forensic matches tying Barry Cook to the murder. Despite testimony that Cook flunked the lie detector test and that Fitzgerald heard Cook admit to his father that he killed Judith Andersen, despite Detective Muranaka's testimony about the jailhouse conversations, and despite Cook's confession to the warden of the prison, the jury found Barry Cook innocent after his parents claimed he was home with them at the time of the killing. Cook was returned to Joliet to finish serving his time for the bus stop attacks. By late 1959, the task force had dwindled from 60 to 11 officers, and the investigations into the murders stalled. A year or so later, as attention turned to other crimes, the Andersen case faded from newspapers. Yet within the department, it haunted generations of detectives. After Charles Fitzgerald retired in 1964, he continued his file on Barry Cook. After Cook was quietly released from Joliet in June of 1967, after serving 9 years, he moved to Houston, Texas to live with his parents. Fitzgerald made sure to fill in the police there about Barry Cook. In 1973, Houston police used Fitzgerald's info to arrest Barry Cook on charges of rape and assault of a woman left for dead by her assailant. Cook never went to trial for that crime, as the woman, the only witness, died before Cook could be brought before a judge. Long after being retired, Charles Fitzgerald referred to the Andersen murder as a crime that time can't forget. He told reporters, "We had our killer once in our grasp. He practically told us the story, but we couldn't prove it." Fitzgerald died in April of 1990 at the age of 82, credited with putting more than 500 felons behind bars. When the Chicago Police Cold Case Unit reopened the file in 2007, Detective James Heigan examined thousands of brittle pages preserved on onion skin paper, old leads, photographs, handwriting samples, and comparison charts. Much of this narrative has become folklore, he admitted, emphasizing that common retellings no longer matched verified evidence. Despite new tools, the unit lacked preserved tissue samples suitable for modern DNA testing. Detectives contacted out-of-state authorities regarding former suspects, including Barry Cook, who had since died, but no new leads emerged. Neighbors in the Austin neighborhood occasionally referred to the corner of North Lotus and Hirsch as Judy's Path. For decades, flowers appeared there every August 16th, typically placed by surviving members of the Andersen family. Judith's parents, Ralph and Ruth Andersen, both lived into the early 2000s. Their later recollections mixed sorrow with weariness. One family friend quoted Ralph as saying, "Whoever did it was clever, not smart, Smart men don't destroy children. Although rumors persisted, no physical evidence ever confirmed a link between the murders of Margaret Gallagher and Judith Andersen. Benjamin Lewis. When Alderman Benjamin Ben F. Lewis won re-election in February 1963, the victory seemed to confirm what his supporters already believed, that the 53-year-old Big Cat of Chicago's 24th Ward was destined for bigger things. 2 days later, his body was found handcuffed to a chair and shot 3 times in the back of the head, a diamond ring still on his finger, a cigarette smoldered to ash between his lifeless fingers. 6 decades on, the murder of Ben Lewis stands as one of Chicago's most brazen political assassinations, a crime that jolted a city already infamous for its corruption, machine politics, and mob intrigue. Born December 2, 1909, Benjamin Franklin Lewis grew up on Chicago's West Side, the son of a working-class family determined to climb out of poverty. A graduate of Crane Technical High School, he worked first as a CTA bus driver and salesman before plunging into the world of West Side politics. By the mid-1950s, Lewis had leveraged his quiet charisma and street wisdom into a seat on the city council. In 1958, he won a special election as the first black alderman from the 24th Ward, a district then transforming under desegregation and post-war migration. Voters loved his showmanship. He sported tailor suits, diamond cufflinks, and the swagger of a jazzman, earning him nicknames like the Duke of Dixieland and the Big Cat. To his base, Lewis was a symbol of black achievement during an era of limited opportunity. To critics inside Chicago's Democratic machine, he was independent to a fault. He owed allegiance to no single boss, a rare, risky posture at a time when Mayor Richard J. Daley's political operation prized loyalty above all else. By 1963, Lewis spoke openly of seeking a seat in Congress. Newspapers reported that his next stop could be Washington. Ben Lewis had just defeated his opponent, Jeff Alford, in a landslide, 13,189 votes to 888, solidifying his status as one of the city's heavyweight black politicians. Lewis's 24th Ward, anchored along West Roosevelt Road in North Lawndale on the city's west side, was an ecosystem of patronage. Political loyalty won jobs, contracts, and favors. Aldermen acted as both advocates and brokers, navigating between legitimate business owners and the underworld financiers who greased local economies. Lewis wielded influence in these circles. He helped small construction firms secure contracts and arrange city jobs for supporters. Yet his alliances invited danger. His financial records told of heavy gambling and trips to Mexico and Las Vegas. Historians later observed that his lifestyle far exceeded his $8,000 annual salary, roughly $85,000 in today's money. Lewis made $8,000 a year but lived a $1 million life, noted historian Richard Lindbergh. To people in power, that made him useful and expendable. Lewis spent February 27, 1963, finishing paperwork at his 24th Ward headquarters on Roosevelt Road, just west of Central Park Avenue, a dilapidated 2-story structure above a tavern. He often entertained visitors late, sometimes gambling or chatting politics with precinct captains. That night, the ward office was being redecorated in celebration of his re-election. Around 10 p.m., a neighbor recalled lights still on. No one saw Lewis leave. When his wife Ella awoke at 1 a.m. and realized her husband had not come home, she wasn't alarmed. He loved the social side of politics, she later said. Ben could talk all night. By morning, Ella Lewis was worried. Shortly after 9 a.m., a building maintenance man unlocked the ward office to clean, before a scheduled meeting. What he found would shock Chicago. Benjamin Lewis lay face down behind his desk, still wearing a business suit. His hands were handcuffed behind his back. Between his middle and index fingers on his right hand was a half-burned cigarette. A blood-stained cushion rested over his head. He had been shot 3 times in the back of the head at close range with a .32 caliber revolver. Detectives later found bullet casings on the floor, but no weapon. When Officer Clarence Belton arrived and phoned Ella Lewis, their exchange was reportedly this. Belton: "Well, Mrs. Lewis, we've had a little trouble here." Ella: "What kind of trouble?" Belton: "A shooting." Ella: "Is Ben hurt? Did you take him to the hospital?" Belton: "No." Ella: "Is he dead?" Belton: "Yes." News spread rapidly. Reporters rushed to the west side. Crowds formed outside, murmuring that the big cat got hit. Time magazine called it one of the most mysterious political killings since Huey Long. Even in a city accustomed to mob-style hits, the execution of a sitting alderman was shocking. At first, detectives suggested robbery, but quickly backtracked. Lewis's valuables remained on him: a gold watch, a diamond ring, a wallet filled with cash. The scene appeared carefully staged. Blood splatter showed he had not struggled. Rumors spread within hours. Was the motive a gambling debt? Infidelities? Some claim Lewis was punished for pocketing more than a share from the illegal lottery syndicate known as the Policy. Others insisted he was planning to testify about political kickbacks. The Criminal Investigation Division formally assigned dozens of detectives. Lie detector tests were administered to the janitor, 2 assistants, Lewis's drivers, secretaries, and ward bosses. All passed. Within weeks, the probe stalled. Privately, FBI informants told agents the Chicago outfit had ordered the hit. Sources named mob enforcers Lenny Patrick and Dave Yaris, both West Side fixers with ties to Teamsters boss Jimmy Hoffa, as possible participants. One later claimed a corrupt police officer acted as triggerman. City Hall kept its distance. Mayor Daley, facing re-election that spring, expressed total confidence in the police and moved quickly to change the subject. Republican mayoral candidate Benjamin Adamowski accused Daley's machine of burying the case, asking, "Why was the resolution for a city council investigation shelved? Is it because the policy racket has been operating openly in the 24th Ward?" The Daley administration offered no public answer. For many observers, the murder's very mystery enabled its disappearance from official memory. As one detective bluntly told the press, he had so many enemies you could fill a stadium. Police investigated a wide cast of possible suspects. Policy racket operators Lewis had allegedly taxed too heavily. Spurned women rumored to include the wife of a gangster. Disgruntled patronage workers and defeated precinct captains, and organized crime brokers who felt Lewis wasn't kicking up profits. Every lead collapsed under pressure. Detectives accused each other of stonewalling. One cop leaked that superiors told him to leave it alone. By April, the file was functionally closed. An FBI memo dated April 15, 1963, later released under the Freedom of Information Act, read, "Police officials indicate the Lewis case is being slow-pedaled due to political sensitivities and the possibility of collateral damage to high-ranking individuals." Lewis's funeral drew thousands to Salem Baptist Church on the west side. Politicians spoke of reform and justice. None delivered either. Daley sent a floral wreath but skipped the service. To quiet outrage, he ordered the city council to honor Lewis posthumously for distinguished public service. The gesture rang hollow. After Lewis's death, the city was slow to fill his position, angering the residents of the 24th Ward. In a Chicago Defender piece from May 18, 1963, titled "Restless 24th Ward Wants a New Leader," Reverend C.S. Hampton, pastor of the Greater Longdale Interracial Missionary Church at 1227 South Independence Boulevard, said he would be willing to call off a protest at City Hall if granted a meeting to discuss the situation with Mayor Daley. Benjamin Big Cat Lewis's seat as 24th Ward Alderman remained vacant for nearly a year. The position was eventually filled by George W. Collins, who officially assumed office on January 21, 1964. Collins, who had previously worked within Chicago's Democratic political machine, went on to build a notable career. He later became a U.S. congressman representing Illinois' 7th District after winning a special election in 1970 to replace Representative Dan Rostenkowski, who moved on to another district. Collins served in Congress until his death in a plane crash near Midway Airport in Chicago in 1972. By the 1970s, the murder of an alderman was a ghost story whispered by older ward captains, a warning about defying the machine. Writer Mick Dumke's ProPublica investigation in 1921, aptly titled "The Murder Chicago Didn't Want to Solve," argued that the cover-up succeeded precisely because Lewis's death exposed too much. Police turned on Ben Lewis, painting him as dirty so the city wouldn't mourn him. His death was strictly a political murder because he wouldn't follow orders. More than 60 years later, Ben Lewis remains the last elected official murdered in Chicago. Yet, the Lewis murder file remains open. FBI archives note activity as late as 2000. Retired detectives still debate whether it was a mob hit, a revenge killing, or a silencing ordered from City Hall. None agree on who pulled the trigger. One thing they do agree on: in a city where vice and politics were inseparable, Ben Lewis died for forgetting that rule. In September of 1993, then 24th Ward Alderman Jesse Miller petitioned the City Council to designate Pulaski Road between Harrison and Cermak, roughly a 2-mile stretch, as Benjamin F. Lewis Road, an honorary designation. Miller said, "Even today, Ben Lewis is considered to have been a stalwart in the community who was a pioneer in making the 24th Ward an independent ward in the city." For those of you who like morbid history locations around Chicago, this means the corner of Cermak, named for former Mayor Anton Cermak, killed by a bullet allegedly intended for Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Pulaski, which carries the Lewis Brown sign, marks the connecting spot honoring the last 2 assassinated Chicago City office holders. Tammy Zywicki. On Sunday, August 23, 1992, the Midwestern sky hung hot and hazy above Interstate 80. Cars hummed westward through the endless fields of Illinois, signaling the end of another summer break. Among them was a white 1985 Pontiac T1000 with college stickers on the rear window. It was driven by Tammy Jo Zywicki, 21, an art history major and photography editor from Grinnell College in Iowa. Zywicki was on her way back to campus after dropping off her younger brother Darren at Northwestern University in Evanston that morning. Their mother, Joanne Zywicki, recalled saying a cheerful goodbye in the driveway. She seemed ready to start her senior year, she told reporters later. "I never imagined that it would be the last time we saw her." Her drive was supposed to be a half-day trip from the Chicago suburbs to Grinnell, Iowa, but somewhere along that 350-mile stretch of highway between Evanston and the Mississippi River, Tammy Zywicki, the upbeat, athletic, 5'2", 120-pound student from Marlton, New Jersey, vanished. Tammy's car had been showing signs of trouble all summer. On several occasions, she had mentioned issues with it overheating, but told her mother it wasn't serious. Around 3:10 p.m., as she headed west near mile marker 83, 5 miles east of LaSalle, Illinois, her Pontiac broke down along the shoulder of Interstate 80. Witnesses later reported seeing the car parked with its hood up in the blazing heat. One motorist remembered spotting Tammy standing beside the car, adjusting her shorts and waving lightly to passing vehicles. 2 separate witnesses came forward to report seeing a tractor-trailer truck with a thin, faded orange stripe parked directly behind her disabled car around 3:20 p.m. The driver, a middle-aged white man, described as tall, with bushy dark hair, was last seen leaning toward her as if speaking through her window. This was the last confirmed sighting of Tammy Zywicki alive. When Tammy failed to check in at Grinnell College that evening, her mother felt an unease she could not shake. Hours later, an Illinois state trooper found the Pontiac abandoned and tagged it as a stranded vehicle without knowing its driver was missing. At 7 p.m., Joanne Zywicki called the police to report her daughter had never arrived at school. For 2 anxious days, the Pontiac sat impounded in a nearby tow yard while Illinois State Police tried to determine whether its owner had disappeared voluntarily or was the victim of something untoward. Eventually, after cross-checking the vehicle registration with a missing person report from Joanne Zywicki, investigators realized they were dealing with a potential abduction. The search expanded overnight. Helicopters swept fields and rest stops along I-80 as hundreds of volunteers began distributing flyers with Tammy's pictures. National media seized on the story of the attractive, college-bound young woman who vanished on the open road. CNN, America's Most Wanted, and the Associated Press all ran bulletins as far away as Denver and Atlanta. The Zywicki's, themselves a close, devout family with roots in New Jersey and South Carolina, kept hope alive that she might have accepted a ride and was stranded somewhere else. Instead, tragedy was waiting 500 miles to the south. On the morning of September 1st, 1992, nearly 9 days after her disappearance, a truck driver pulled to the side of Interstate 44 just outside Mount Vernon, Missouri, about halfway between Springfield and Joplin. The driver noticed a large red-colored bundle among the roadside brush. What he found and promptly reported to police would horrify investigators. Wrapped tightly in a red blanket, sealed with duct tape, lay the body of Tammy Zywicki. Her identification was confirmed later that evening through dental records. The medical examiner's report detailed a brutal and personal attack. Tammy had been stabbed 7 to 8 times in the chest, the wounds forming a peculiar circular pattern around her heart, as though her killer had aimed deliberately for one spot. The weapon was small and sharp, possibly a screwdriver or paring-type knife. She had been sexually assaulted. Her broken fingernails suggested a fierce struggle. The body still wore the same clothes she had last been seen in, shorts and a white shirt. Missing, however, were several personal belongings: a Canon 35mm camera, a St. Giles Soccer Club patch, and an inexpensive Loris musical wristwatch that played "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head." The state of Tammy's remains suggested she had been killed elsewhere and transported to Missouri after death. Specialists found that the blood traces and insect activity showed that the body had been at the dump site less than 48 hours. If accurate, that meant Tammy had likely been held captive for nearly a week before her life was so viciously snuffed out. After news of the discovery reached Illinois, state and federal agencies combined forces. The FBI, Illinois State Police, and Missouri Highway Patrol launched one of the most extensive interstate homicide investigations of the decade. Within weeks, over 16,000 interviews were conducted. Truckers, rest stop attendants, and motorists detailing every possible sighting. Witnesses recalled a man driving a semi-truck with a red and orange stripe parked near Tammy's car at mile 83. Others mentioned that the driver may have been operating a Kenworth tractor-trailer. That red blanket, a make commonly used in Kenworth cabins, immediately raised investigators' attention. The murder appeared methodical, suggesting either an experienced long-haul driver or someone familiar with interstate logistics. A separate clue surfaced when a nurse at the LaSalle County Health Department claimed she'd seen a musical wristwatch identical to Tammy's being flaunted by another woman months after the murder. That woman turned out to be the ex-wife of a truck driver named Lonnie Bierbrot. Illinois State Police Special Agent Marty McCarthy was the case's chief investigator. After reviewing hundreds of leads, he fixated on Lonnie Bierbrot, an ex-convict and trucker from LaSalle County with prior felony convictions for armed robbery. Bierbrot drove cross-country freight routes through both Illinois and Missouri and, crucially, lived near the very stretch of I-44 where Tammy's body was recovered. According to McCarthy, Bierbrot had been visiting family in the Peru-LaSalle area the week Tammy disappeared and admitted to police he had driven the same route on August 23rd. He had also owned a Kenworth truck and frequently carried red blankets imprinted with that company's logo, the same pattern used to wrap Tammy's body. Bierbrot's then-wife reportedly confirmed the couple had marital issues, but later refused interviews. When investigators finally met her, she refused to hand over the allegedly gifted musical watch. Bierbrot himself denied involvement and passed away in 2002 without ever being charged. McCarthy remained convinced he was guilty, but lack of physical evidence kept the case open and cold. Forensics in 1992 weren't what they are today, McCarthy told reporters years later. We just couldn't lock it down. Over the years, additional suspects surfaced. Among them was trucker Bruce Mendenhall, convicted of several highway slayings in the 2000s. He bore similarities in method, sexual assaults, rest stop killings, long transport legs, but forensic comparisons yielded nothing of value. Another theory suggested serial killer Larry Hall, whose known killings involved young Midwestern women abducted from roadways. Again, no match. The FBI's behavioral analyst characterized Tammy's murderer as an opportunist predator familiar with truck stop environments. The sequence, abduction from a breakdown, likely deception, offering help, then captivity and methodical stabbing, fit classic long-haul killer behavior. Still, without the offender's DNA, the case remains unsolved. The Zywicki's refused to let their daughter's story fade. Tammy's mother, Joanne, maintained meticulous correspondence with federal agents over 3 decades, keeping the case alive whenever administrations changed. Tammy's brother, Todd Zywicki, now a law professor at George Mason University, became the family spokesperson. He told People magazine, "When I heard she was gone, I just collapsed. I fell to the floor. You never stop replaying what you could have said or done differently." Even through heartbreak, Joanne expressed persistence. "When you see 40-year-old cases that are being solved, I still think there's a chance," she told reporters in 2021. Tammy's classmates at Grinnell College held annual vigils for years, lighting candles outside the Forum building where she had worked as photo editor for The Scarlet and Black. A suite of her black and white prints, student portraits, sports scenes, and candid campus moments remains archived in the college library. In 2017, advances in DNA technology prompted a fresh sweep of evidence. The Illinois State Police Crime Lab, armed with next-generation analysis tools, re-examined fibers, adhesive residue, and biological samples from the red blanket. The FBI's Chicago field office announced a renewed appeal for witnesses, releasing age-progressed sketches of possible persons of interest, including a reconstruction of the semi-driver seen near Tammy's Pontiac. During the 30-year anniversary in 2022, the Des Moines Register summarized the impasse bluntly. Despite interstate police cooperation and more advanced forensics, Tammy Zywicki's murder remains one of the Midwest's most enduring highway mysteries. Her case file, spanning tens of thousands of pages, still sits at Illinois State Police Headquarters in Joliet. In 1992, hitchhiking and roadside assistance from strangers were still relatively common. After Tammy's death, Illinois officials issued the Zywicki Advisory, a series of public service announcements urging motorists, especially women, to remain inside locked vehicles and await official help. Within months, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration revised roadside safety guidelines, partly inspired by the case's publicity. In response to Zywicki's death, student activists at Grinnell College formed an organization called Fearless, which lobbied for solar-powered emergency call boxes at every mile marker on U.S. highways. One alumna later recalled, "We were lobbying for solar-powered call boxes at every mile marker on highways across the U.S., and then just a few years later, cell phones happened." In March of 2024, law enforcement sources confirmed to multiple outlets that new DNA profiles had been successfully extracted from trace evidence on the duct tape, sparking cautious optimism. Although the findings have not been publicly detailed, retired agents believe that genealogical techniques, similar to those that caught the Golden State Killer, may finally point investigators toward a suspect or relatives. All of Tammy's surviving family members have supplied updated DNA for cross-reference. "Every test, every sample, it's all worth it," Joanne Zywicki told CBS News in 2023. "If it takes one more year or another 10, we'll wait." 3 decades after Tammy's final drive, Interstate 80 remains one of America's busiest east-west arteries for freight and travel. At mile 83, near where her Pontiac broke down, motorists still pass a faded white cross maintained by volunteers. Its inscription reads, "In loving memory, Tammy Jo Zywicki, 1992. She never made it home." For residents of LaSalle County and parents from the Midwest to the Atlantic, the case endures as a cautionary landmark, proof that danger can emerge in the span of a mile. To the Zywicki family, however, it remains a promise unfulfilled. Todd Zywicki summarized it in 2021 with quiet clarity, saying, "She's been gone from us longer now than she was ever with us, but she still lives here," he said, pressing a hand over his heart. He paused before adding what could serve as both eulogy and vow. Someone out there knows what happened, and until that person is found, Tammy Jo Zywicki's story isn't over. Thanks for listening to Ghosts of the City, Chicago's Unsolved Murders. This episode was written, recorded, and edited by me, Tommy Henry. As always, if you have questions about anything covered today, anything to add, or have an idea for a future episode, I'd love to hear about it. Send me an email at chicagohistorypod@gmail.com. I have links to items related to Chicago's amazing history in the show's notes. If you or someone you know is a history nerd like me who would like to learn more, anything ordered through those links, not just the items listed, may earn a small commission for the podcast to help offset production costs at no additional cost to you. Check out the Chicago History Podcast social media pages for articles and pictures related to this episode and past episodes posted throughout the week. The majority of the original art for the Chicago History Podcast used on the social media pages was created by John K. Schneider. Thanks, Pally. If you need creative work done, you can find no one better. Send him an email at angeleyesartjks@gmail.com. I will be back soon with more stories from Chicago's history. Until then, get out and explore when possible. Learn more about whatever city you live in, and stay safe.